Fokker Super Universal CF-AAM took part in some of the most significant events in early Canadian aviation history. But often it's the simplest of stories that are the most compelling. In 1935, a young engineer named John Scott arrived in Mayo, Yukon to work. This meant being separated from his fiancée, Dorothy Phelps, who was working as a nurse 200 miles south in Whitehorse.
We were engaged, and then her parents kept working on her to wait till the next year, which is right, and then I could come down here and have a proper wedding. But she decided she wanted to get married. You know, not going to hang around that long. And I got word that she was going to come up, and that was around the 1st of December. And she set a date for me to come down and meet her. And I went down there, and to say it was 56 below Fahrenheit when that plane landed on the river ice right in front of town. And I walked out there, and here she was in this plane. She was all by herself, the lone passenger, and she was in the back of the airplane, entirely surrounded by freight right to the ceiling. If we had to move out of the freight before she could get out.
The young groom wasted no time in starting his new life with the woman that could be jokingly referred to as his mail-order bride.
And we waded through the snow back across to the riverbank in Mayo and climbed up to the Anglican Church rectory, where I had arranged to have a couple witnesses, and we got married just like that. Bang. Then we had nearly 50 years of wonderful marriage life together. We had a wonderful life. I couldn't ask for anything better.
This is the incredible true story of legendary Fokker CF-AAM, from its first flight to its untimely end, and the team that brought it back to life. Following the National Geographic Washburn expedition, Bob Randall continued to fly AAM for Northern Airways and its owner, George Simmons. This meant flying over some of the most isolated areas in the north, in some of the harshest conditions, where the risk of being stranded was literally a matter of life and death.
You had to be quite self-sufficient. You had to leave your home port or your home base well-equipped and prepared, and with the knowledge that things could easily go wrong, perhaps just a case of bad weather and being stranded. So you had to be prepared to survive in the cold conditions and look after your aircraft. And these kinds of things you had to be prepared to do and knowledgeable enough to do.
In January of 1937, Randall was taking off from Francis Lake carrying passengers and cargo when a snowdrift broke one of the skis, causing the airplane to settle on its wing and breaking the tip.
It was very rough. The surface, the snowdrifts were rough. And the next morning, taking off, the skis had been rigged wrongly. The safety cable and the 1G cable had been put into one ring, and this one ring was attached to the front end of the ski. That ring broke taking off, and of course the ski went down and caught in the snow and pulled it down. I had to pull the throttle on it and broke the end off the wing. That was it.
A snowstorm rolled in, preventing any attempt of outside contact or rescue. After 4 days, Randall was able to get word out of his predicament. Northern Airways had expanded their fleet and so dispatched their other Fokker, CF-ATJ, to rescue the passengers. By this time, Randall's wife Hilda was on the steamer Princess Nora when the radio message finally reached her. Hilda was expecting, and so, with 2 young sons in tow, and with no word from her husband, she made her way by sled and train from Carcross to Skagway, where she boarded the ship to Vancouver.
We had spoken about this and sort of agreed that, if he didn't happen to be back from any place, when the time came, that I would go. The only unfortunate thing was that I had to lug trunks and what have you over to the station on a toboggan. My two boys weren't much help. I gave one a washboard and the other one a houseplant, and they sat down in the middle of the bridge and refused to go any further. But I don't think any of the women, the wives of pilots, really sat at home and worried.
For Bob Randall, this would be his last flight with CF-AAM.
Right after that, I left for Mackenzie Air Service in Edmonton.
So you've got this airplane down on the lake, you've broken it all in pieces, and then you say bye-bye. Is this what it is?
Well, I'd said bye-bye before. I didn't do it on purpose.
Then the question arises as to whether or not you can effect some temporary repairs. The aircraft are a little more adaptable to temporary bush repairs than modern aluminum aircraft and the way they're constructed today.
AAM was expected to be written off by its insurer, Lloyd's of London. But on a subsequent trip, ATJ suffered a similar fate when it broke its landing gear and wingtip on the same rough ice on Francis Lake. It came to rest alongside the crippled AAM with virtually the same damage, instantly changing the economics of a wilderness salvage operation. Therefore, Lloyd's decided it was feasible to repair both aircraft on site, miles from civilization. Lloyd's contracted a 4-man work crew from Boeing to perform the repairs. One of these men was a young apprentice mechanic and woodworker named Gord Haddon. Here he describes his first impressions of the Yukon.
It was a new adventure to me, and it was quite interesting to see all the snow, and I know the equipment that I was told to take up there certainly wasn't the proper thing to take up in that kind of temperature.
Using a primitive pine tripod and pulley block, they succeeded in raising the 2-ton AAM off the ice. The wing was removed and transported to a nearby cabin that fortunately had been built with a large window facing the lake. The wingtip was placed through the window and a tarp was used to seal the workers from the outside elements. With this setup complete, the crew began the tedious process of repairing the damaged section. The stove in the cabin had to be constantly fed to prevent the fresh glue from freezing.
The job probably couldn't have been completed if it hadn't been for that cabin being on that lake, because in those days the casein glues required a fairly warm temperature, and it was only because the cabin was there, and we're able to stick the wing in the cabin to get the broken part inside and then where it was warm to do the repairs. It was probably the only reason the job was actually finished in the first place. I don't think it could have been accomplished outside. It seemed to be an endless job in that cabin. You almost got cabin fever, as a matter of fact. This was 4 or 5 guys in there all for almost 2 months. But anyway, we succeeded. But it was 60 below at times, and it was quite cool.
Finally, after 2 months of toil, the wing was reinstalled and a replacement landing gear leg was fitted. AAM's new pilot, Les Cook, flew her back to civilization. AAM was later flown down to Vancouver, where Gordon Haddon and the team at Coates Aircraft Repair performed a general overhaul. Extensive work was performed on the wing, particularly the replacement of the deteriorated ply covering. The sliding glass side windows were replaced with one-piece perspex in order to reduce weight and therefore increase the airplane's capacity. With the mining season drawing to a close, crews were seeking passage south, and on Monday, December 5th, 1937, Les Cook loaded a group of 6 miners at the airfield at Dawson. This would be AAM's last takeoff attempt for 61 years. A total of 28 Fokker Super Universals operated in Canada, and every one of them died a working death. Not a single original example had been preserved for future generations. Fokker Super Universal CF-AAM took part in some of the most significant events in early Canadian aviation history. But it's the story of AAM's death and resurrection that made it a legend in its own right.